Welcome to the Open Treasury Podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where Treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. And now your host, Jack Large.
Hello and welcome to our 7th Open Treasury podcast. I'm here with Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner, Strategic Treasurer, to review the important topics that we've covered over the last 2 weeks. Craig, the first one we've got is Feedzai's RiskOps platform, where they brought all their tools together to produce probably the best RiskOps platform ever. And the scale of it is quite incredible. They've got over 1 trillion different points of data and different feeds. They've got global coverage. They've got a range of different aspects. What do you think the impact of this sort of platform is going to have on the corporate treasurer?
One, I'm unsure how it'll have the biggest impact, other than we see this happening, using these cloud native solutions to pull and aggregate massive amounts of information for analysis. And so to me, this is part of the line of the promise of big data and analytics pulled together. So that sounds really bullish when I say that, and I think that's probably a fair characterization. It's really using the tools that are available now that really couldn't do this in any reasonable manner earlier. So we see this happening with risk related to website monitoring, cyber hygiene, et cetera. So those are exploding in terms of their capabilities and how it handles things systematically. And I would say it's the same thing here. And I know you talked about some of these areas with quite a bit of interest. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. And you may even disagree with what I just said.
The thing that they've done is brought all the types of risk together: fraud, the cybersecurity stuff, the money laundering, the compliance and risk policies together. And with their 3-pillar approach, using comprehensive architecture, human-centered AI and collaborative analytics. And that collaborative analytics is quite huge. It's got 4 major areas. All of a sudden, and it is sudden because they've only just achieved this, corporate treasurers is now being offered something that's far more complete than they've ever had before. My question really is, can corporate treasurers handle it, or are they not looking at the problem like this?
Yeah, I think increasingly they are looking at things more broadly across the spectrum. Maybe not all the cyber risk, but counterparty risk, that's been growing as well. Concerns and control around payments, security and compliance there. Those are all growing. None of them are shrinking.
And I agree. And we're in early stages of this much more complete types of solution. This one is one to watch. I will be reporting on Feedzai's progress over the coming months. Now, our second major area that we covered over the last couple of weeks is how international payments are growing and growing. No surprise. But what is surprising is how it's becoming regional, in that Singapore and the Philippines have got together and partnered to do integrated services between their 2 centers, their 2 countries. It's rather like the EU the central bank is building a system for just the EU. I suspect we're going to have 3 or 4 major regions. How's the corporate treasurer going to react to this?
Payment professionals probably think about this maybe even earlier than corporate treasurers. But I guess when I see this, I think if everything's an individual country, payments and cross-border activity becomes extremely complex, different in-country activities. And interoperability is really the name of the success. And whether it's all global or whether it happens on a regional basis, it's the power of these, internal networks connecting to networks, I guess is how I'm seeing this. And that type of strategy is working for payments, it seems. It also works for these registries and networks for managing AP vendors. So it's just a way of expanding on the power of networks, which has worked in almost every area that we've seen so far. Your thoughts, Jack?
Yeah, Citi have just announced a new addition to their real-time instant payment service, which has had 100% growth in the last 12 months, where they have the same procedure in 28 countries to make and receive instant payments. There are little country differences between the countries, and Citi have eliminated that, so it's just one platform to send an instant payment and to receive it. I think that's another example of what we're going to see, because I suspect there is going to be some differences between the regional solutions in Asia Pacific and the EU and so on.
Yeah, your comment, the same procedure for every country, covering over the local differences. That's really one of the key things about a power of a network. It's like, now it's standardized. I have one phone that can call every country. Okay, that becomes a game changer.
Absolutely a game changer, and that's no surprise that Citi have had 100% growth in the last 12 months on their instant payment service. The other another thing that is a game changer is stablecoins, which the big problem with the central banks developing their own digital currency is that it's not commercial enough, and that's the first point. And the second point, and probably the more important point at the moment, because there's over 2 trillion in cyber coins of some form or other already in the world finance, is the US have just done a report on stablecoins and are just saying they need regulating. How do you think, and how do corporate treasurers react to this? Because my experience at the moment is they're just saying, no chance, no way am I getting involved. All the treasurers I talk to on a regular basis are saying we're not doing Bitcoin or any version of that until it's really stable and it works. And I'm confident that when I have assets in my various books and spreadsheets, they really are assets. The regulators are coming in and saying we need to regulate it, but how the hell are they going to do it?
When you started talking through this, it brought back a couple thoughts. Like, the promise of some of these digital currencies is interesting. The use of them is extremely light. I mean, there's a number of firms that have basically piloted some small activity, almost as a trial, a very small percentage of their assets to hold things like Bitcoin. MassMutual had done some of that. I don't know how many months ago it was, but it's a very small fraction of what they're doing from a portfolio standpoint, not necessarily from a trading standpoint. So there's a lot of discussion about it, but there's not, I don't see much use anecdotally or from surveys and research on the corporate side. But the regulation, your points about regulation is, from crime to terrorism, all of the major countries spend significant resources to cut the flow of funds that have anonymous traction, and so they're going to regulate these items at the endpoints or through the middle. It becomes a challenge, but they're not going to let things get too big. And $2 trillion is pretty significant.
Yeah, it's already significant. The other figure that came out of AFP, which I saw earlier today, is that the transactions on the blockchain network take 10 seconds and more, and that's the average, which doesn't relate to what Visa does, what Citibank does on instant payments. This is one to watch, but for sure the regulators are going to come in. There's no doubt about that. And then the final topic, and inevitably we have to talk about this, is the COP26 climate conference. As it's winding down, we had an article by Tim Nicol, the CEO of Prima Dollar, on the data required in ESG to really control what's going on and monitor and see what people are really doing. And he speaks quite eloquently in the article about the need to hold account the organizations that give net zero pledges. And the only way you can do this is with real time or almost real time or very frequent reporting, accurate reporting. How do you see this affecting corporate treasury's investment policy? Are they being influenced at all yet by ESG and the pressures there?
Yeah, they are. Are they being influenced heavily? I think that's more isolated on certain company basis. So it's not massive, but are they being influenced? Yes. Is it increasing over time? Certainly. If you go back 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, there's more discussions, more activity. You had an article put out earlier this week, the Journeys in Treasury article by BNP Paribas, PwC, SAP, and EACT. One of the items there is Treasurer's role in ESG. They concluded that treasurers really haven't fully embraced the ESG agenda in their departments. Now, not fully embraced doesn't mean not open to it, not learning, not gaining, appreciation for it. So I think part of that is there is a move. It's steady. It's not lightning fast, but it's definitely moving, and it seems like it's picked up more. It varies by organization. Certain organizations are much more to make it part of their policy, and others are certainly exploring it. And the policy might be a small percentage of what they do with their investments, but it's real, is what I would say. But it's not huge.
It better grow very quickly, because the other thing that came out of COP yesterday was that if the countries just stick with what they're doing right now, we're going to get 2.4 degrees increase in global temperatures, which will be a catastrophe. It's really, really scary. How are we going to get the momentum going?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but maybe if I could dovetail, it's like, people that go to COP26, they went physically as opposed to doing it virtually. And I think that speaks to the value of in-person activities, especially big events. And I don't know, maybe I can jump in about the AFP. That was the event this week in the U.S. We talked about Eurofinance earlier. People were energized by being in person. We saw that in the U.S. as well. There's this pent-up demand, and there's a different way of collaborating when they're together. We saw what, our view was that it was better than expected attendance. There were very serious people there about everything, whether we had conversations about ESG, a lot of conversations about technology. Most organizations that attended are really looking at moving things forward. And so I guess I see this as 2022 will be a huge year for these larger treasury and finance events to happen. And it'll be back probably close to normal from what we've seen historically.
So what would be your key takeaway from the last 2 weeks? The single takeaway?
I'm gonna do it with with one of the announcements that came out. Cashforce and FIS. I think this, Cashforce being the forecasting, and working capital management tool being layered onto the two primary treasury products of FIS. So, Integrity, which is their workhorse Treasury system, as well as Quantum, which is the larger enterprise Treasury risk system. I think this says a number of things. One, the focus on forecasting, the need for ability to visualize, change, drill into things is extremely important, which is cash forces strength, and the ability to expand into the adjacent areas of core Treasury to support forecasting functions, from FIS's side, says a lot about this expanding view of Treasury and the power of tech to help us get there. And this is, I don't know if you want to call it open Treasury, but this ability to connect, I think, bears significant watching.
Sadly, my takeaway from the last 2 weeks is the photograph of our Prime Minister Boris Johnson asleep at COP26 in front of everybody. Says it all. Cheers.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.